Hello and welcome to the 300th episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
My God, Craig, did you ever think we'd get to 300?
Absolutely not. I didn't think we'd get to 30. This is insane.
Kind of unreal. Oh my gosh, we started out the very first episode with the people under the stairs. And then I think when we got to 50, we were like, we should do another Wes Craven one since it's like our 50th. And we started with the Wes Craven one. And then pretty much every milestone after that, with one exception, I think we did Something Wicked This Way Comes for like our 150th or something.
Yeah,
like that,
maybe. We did. We deviated from our formula once.
We broke the chain.
But then we came back to it.
It didn't curse us. We're still going another 150 episodes later. So here we are. We still have more Wes Craven stuff to choose from, and not even the most obscure stuff either. The movie that we chose for today is 1977's The Hills Have Eyes. Probably one of Wes Craven's most notorious ones from his early period.
Yeah.
This was only the second movie, I think, that he had written, and he really didn't want to continue doing horror.
Right.
He was an English teacher, but really wanted to get into filmmaking. He wrote The Last House on the Left, directed it too, right? And primarily for the, drive-in crowd, just a cheap exploitation movie, but based off of an Ingmar Bergman film. The guy's smart, and he has a very literary mind and a good sense of what makes a good story, and had good material to kind of choose from. But that movie's pretty brutal.
Yeah, very brutal.
It's really nasty. Yeah, and it's definitely hardcore exploitation, and he really wanted to do something non-exploitative, but nothing was really getting off the ground, and he just realized I could do another horror film, and this was the result.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, it's funny. If I remember correctly, I think that the producer said, look, we're out in Nevada, and our families are here. There's lots of desert. Let's make a desert horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Craven went. He went into like the archives of true crime stuff, and was just kind of looking around, and found a story of this family from the 1400s in England, I believe, or Scotland. I don't remember. Scotland.
Yeah, Sawney Bean and his supposed clan.
Yeah, and it was like this feral family who captured, tortured, and ate transients, and they lived on the coast in this cave that faced the sea, and like the cave would be concealed at high tide, and so nobody could find them, but eventually one of their victims escaped and talked to went to the king, and they were captured. And then they were all brutally tortured and killed as punishment for their crimes. And that was really his inspiration for this movie, which I think is so interesting, that the idea of, what is the difference between being civilized versus being savage, and ultimately how the most civilized of people can be just as savage as the most savage of people, and vice versa. And that was kind of the setup for this story, which is far deeper than you would anticipate for this type of movie. But if you look at it through that lens, it makes a lot of sense. And it's actually, it's interesting in an intellectual way. I mean, the movie is brutal. It's a brutal horror movie. It's violent and scary, but honestly, if you look at it through that lens, you've got this white suburban Midwest family who you would never anticipate could be capable of the kind of violence and brutality that eventually happens here. But when faced with it, I don't know if it's just that they're primal instincts surface when survival is necessary, but it does.
It's kind of like a survival instinct too, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of movies, since then and probably before this to a certain degree, have dealt with this. Straw Dogs by Sam Peckinpah, one of my favorite movies. It's really up there in my top 50. Deliverance, where you just have these kind of people who are quite naive coming into a place. And also with Deliverance and with that, and I think also with this movie, there's another subtext, and that is that these folks are the sort of outcast. They're the disadvantaged folks. I feel like this movie's really dripping with that subtext too, particularly the way it's set up. When this family is driving through the desert to go to California, like you said, he's the father's name is Bob. I think he's a retired police officer. The mom is super Christian, super nice gal who's always huddling the family up to pray and telling everybody to watch their language. They have a daughter and a son, and then they have significant others, and there's a baby. And they're all just, it's this very suburban, typical, middle class American road trip with a camper trailer that they're,
Winnebago
driving behind their station wagon. Even up into the 80s, this is such a trope. It's just something we all laugh about. And they're driving through a place they're completely unfamiliar with. It could have been the woods. In fact, I read that he had originally wrote the script to take place in the wilderness. But this is just as much wilderness. I don't know if you've ever driven much through the west part or southwest of the United States, where it's just nothing but miles and miles and miles of desert as far as you can see. You can see for miles, and there's nothing there. And except the sun and a very big landscape that, although beautiful and expansive, is very unfamiliar, to most of us. Yet this is a place where our military has set up bases and has famously, experimented with weaponry and atomic bombs. And it has actually had an effect on the few people that have lived out there, most of whom are living out there because their economic conditions dictate it. It's cheap enough to be out there, and so in many ways, they're victims of these sort of terrible experiments where nobody really gave a shit about these people and knew what was going to happen and didn't really care. And so it feels like it's that kind of harsh, brutal environment, very much like the guys jumping into the wilderness of the Appalachians or wherever it is in Deliverance, where they're really out of their league. They really don't know what they're getting into. They're just off on their sense of adventure, going to California.
Yeah.
Telling you, we're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I wonder how far it is to the nearest cheeseburger.
We don't usually get folk up this way. Where you heading?
California. L.A. Movie stars in fancy cars.
California? You sure as hell off the beaten track for that.
They go up to the gas station, and it's the last gas station for miles. And Fred's oasis,
Yeah.
This tiny little grizzly guy, who's 70-something. He's in his 70s. I did the math based on the story he was telling. He's somewhere in his 70s, and what does he do? He says, you guys just do not veer from the road. Keep going. Don't go to the mountains. Don't do anything like that. It's very much the gas station trope that I think a few years before this was more or less set up by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which Wes Craven admired very much. And
big inspiration.
And took a lot of inspiration from it, even used some crew from there.
Props. Yeah. Right, and you're right. I'm a small town guy, but the area that I live in is relatively rural, so I'm accustomed to the expanse of a forest. And even in, this is middle America where I live, the wilderness is accessible, but it's dangerous. If you get lost out there, you could potentially be lost indefinitely. I haven't done a lot of travel to the Southwest, but I have visited Las Vegas. Las Vegas is one of my favorite places in the world. And, it's just this crazy little city set in this valley in the desert surrounded by mountains. and I have driven in and around Los Angeles, and I've visited the desert out there too. And it's the production crew and cast talk about this and some behind the scene things that we've seen. Craven and his producer scouted this area. I think they ended up filming in a place called Apple Valley or something like that in Nevada. And it's just, it's the desert. And in the summer, the temperatures would reach 125 degrees during the day, completely desolate and isolated. Where they filmed was a good 30 minutes from any civilization, and so they just packed their entire cast and crew into like 2 or 3 Winnebagos and drove them out there each day. And it was, the just scorching hot weather. And when they were scouting this area and they were asking around about it, people familiar with the area were like, don't go out there, you'll die. And here are these, 2 guys from New York scouting this area, and they commented about how beautiful it is, and it is. It's a valley, basically. It's just lots of flat land, but completely surrounded by these rocky hills that are beautiful as landscape, but also treacherous. And just the environment itself is dangerous and scary. And take out the mutant hill people and these suburbanites who are completely out of their element, stranded with a disabled car in the desert. That alone is life-threatening.
It is.
but then you throw in this family of antagonists who, they're the bad guys. They're cannibal killers, mutants, but frankly, they're just minding their own business, and these people have encroached on their territory, and these people, are out there and they are desperate. Fred, the gas station guy, he talks in one of the very early scenes to what I think is the youngest of the clan, a girl named Ruby, played by Janice Blythe, and Ruby explains that they are desperate.
Here.
Oh, no, you don't. Ain't no trading today, Ruby. And not no more, neither. You folks gone too far. Trooper's been snooping around. Air Force been through here twice. You folks have to go rob a goddamn Air Force PX for God's sakes.
We're hungry. No one comes through back there anymore.
They've basically, been abandoned by civilization and society, and they're just doing what they can and what they have to do to survive. And she is desperate to escape, but really doesn't have any outlet. Fred is planning on leaving, and Ruby wants to go with him, but he says, no, your dad would gut me if he found out that I even was thinking about leaving, let alone taking you with me. So as villainous as they are, and they're brutal, they are, like you said, kind of victims of circumstance too. And I think that that's something that's easy to overlook. If you're just watching this movie as an exploitation 1970s violent kind of murder movie, it works on that level, and it's good and entertaining on that level. But if you think about it even a little bit, it's more complex than you might imagine.
Yeah. And I mean, you could almost miss that if you just missed the first, 5-10 minutes, because I think Craven does a really nice job of setting that up in the beginning. Especially when he's talking about the Air Force. It's like civilization is nearby, but it's literally flyover country, right?
Yeah.
These modern airplanes are zooming by and being noisy and disrupting them, and they drop their junk there. These guys are running around with obvious surplus equipment that they found that's been abandoned. They're using walkie-talkies that have USAF on them. They're really just scavenging this stuff. The crumbs, drop from the table. But there's some real peril, when he mentions all this. He's packing up a pig in a crate in the back of his truck as he's getting ready to leave. But he's obviously really nervous even about leaving, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting. It's never really said, but it almost feels like he has for a long time had this comfortable sort of understanding or relationship or agreement with them because, as I guess we later learn, he arguably fathered.
Yeah, that's a big exposition piece later.
Yeah.
I mean, we may as well talk about it here because,
yeah.
I mean, but yeah, he says that he and his wife moved out to this area. And I guess it was before it was desolate, and they had a baby girl who he just gushes over and says she was the most beautiful child you've ever seen in your life. But then his wife became pregnant again, and they don't really make much of it in this movie. They do mention the fact that this was like a nuclear weapon test site. I feel like in the remake, they make more of a deal out of it and suggest that the disfigurement that these mutants or whatever have is potentially a result of the radiation in the area. They don't make a big deal out of it. In fact, most of the clan, the feral clan here, is not disfigured, with one exception that I can't wait to talk about. But but he says that his wife then became pregnant again, and it was just a terrible pregnancy. And when she gave birth, the kid, it was a 20-pound kid, and it came out sideways and almost tore his wife in half, and just disfigured and covered in hair, and was just, trouble from the beginning. From the time the kid could move around, accidents started happening. He found chickens with their heads bit off, and all kinds of other weird things happening, until eventually he went into town to get supplies or something, and when he came back, the entire house had been burned down with his wife and daughter in it, and the only survivor was this son. And so he beat the son within an inch of his life, took him out to the desert and left him for dead. But he didn't die. Fred thinks, he somehow managed, his words not mine, managed to steal some whore that nobody cared about, and ended up fathering this whole brood of feral children who are now adult and living in the hills.
It's a real kind of classically insane story, right? It's like just really over the top, tale as old as time, sort of Frankenstein type origin story for this clan. But,
not impossible, no. Could happen. So you've got that set up there, and you don't see, that's what, one of the things that I like about this movie is you don't see much of the feral clan at all for at least the first half of the movie. Mm-hmm.
Not until they're a real threat. Yeah.
Right. You hear them talking and making noises, but the camera doesn't look at them. And a lot of the time, you see things from their perspective. They are very voyeuristic for the first half of the movie, looking through binoculars and speaking via radio, and it's very menacing, and the title is fitting. The Hills Have Eyes, because it does look like this family who ends up getting stranded out there, they're being watched from afar.
Jupiter. Papa.
Papa Hunter, identify.
Mama. Pluto. You say a station wagon and a trailer?
That's what Mercury said. If you can believe him.
They coming.
Pluto.
They stuck good. Easy pickings now.
And that voyeuristic, kind of being observed, being watched, it's spooky.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the family has no idea what's going on. The family we're introduced to immediately because they come right after the scene with Fred and Ruby. The family shows up. And it's a relatively big family, traveling together. The patriarch is Big Bob Carter, played by Russ Grieve. I don't know a lot of these people, and I'll gush about the ones that I do know about in just a second. But
of course you will.
Yeah, Big Bob Carter and his wife Ethel, played by Virginia Vincent. They're the parents, and they're celebrating their 25th anniversary, which I guess is the silver anniversary. And some relative, an aunt or something, has gifted them an old silver mine because it's their silver anniversary. And that's why they're here. They're taking this trip to California. Again, being a Midwesterner myself, my family did this. We would travel to the coast. We would travel to Florida. We would travel... I think we only went to California once when I was really little, but those of us who live in landlocked areas, these are like, the exciting, going to the coast and the ocean and seeing all of that. That's a big deal. And so that's what they're doing, but they're taking a route so that they can see this mine that they have been gifted. And Fred tells them, that's stupid. There's nobody out there. The mine has been stripped. There's no silver. There's nothing to see. Don't go out there. But they're determined. And they've got kids. Their oldest daughter, Lynn, is played by Dee Wallace.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Everybody knows. I don't have to. Everybody knows. I just love Dee Wallace. I really, honest to God, think that she is a very, very good actress. She just has a natural presence. She is believable as whatever character she plays. I'm envious of her. I act. I'm hesitant to even say that because it's silly community theater stuff that I do, and I don't consider myself talented at all, but I enjoy doing it. And so I'm envious of people like her who can just be so natural in every role that they play. And the only movie that she had done before this was a religious film. This was kind of her breakout role, and it very much was. I mean, very soon after that, she did E.T., and she's been around in Hollywood doing all kinds of movies. She's huge in the horror world still. Mm-hmm. She pops up all over the place in cameo
so many
roles.
Movies we've done.
And in starring roles. I know. I mean, of the 300 movies that we've done, probably 15 or more, she's been in. And she's young and fresh-faced, but, completely recognizable. Not only is she a beautiful woman, but she has a beautiful, soft, kind of soothing voice that I just love. I could go on about her forever. I won't. I'll leave it at that. But her breakout role, love to see her in this. She's married to a guy named Doug, played by Martin Spear, and they have a baby named Katie. Mm-hmm. Then there are two other kids who, I don't know if they're twins. I was getting twin vibes from them just because they look similar ages and they're both blondes. But Bobby and Brenda are the youngest. Bobby's played by a guy named Robert Houston or Houston, who I don't know anything about aside from the fact that he was not the first choice. They cast somebody else. But the other young man that they cast in the role read the script and was disgusted and turned it down. Mm-hmm. And so he was second choice and he got called in to play it. And then Brenda is played by Susan Lanier, who is actually, she's supposed to be Dee Wallace's younger sister. She's actually, I think, a year older than her, but she looks young. They're the youngest, and they have 2 dogs, 2 German Shepherds, Beauty and Beast. And they're all traveling together in a camper. It's just so. I know these people. I am these people, and I think that that's what Craven was going for. I think that he felt the same way. You know, he came from a like a Southern Baptist family.
Yeah.
I think his father left, and when his father left, his mother got very heavily into the Baptist church, and so they were very, very conservative. Couldn't dance. The only movies that Craven saw in the theater until he was a senior in college were Disney films.
It's so crazy.
I know, and you know the reason that we do this is because we have so much respect and admiration for Wes Craven, and because we love horror movies, and he made so many great ones. I always love going back and watching interviews with Wes Craven, and even him playing himself in New Nightmare. You mentioned that he was an English professor, and he seems like it. He seems very much like an English professor. But what always I'm never surprised by how intelligent he is. He just seems like an incredibly intelligent person. But he's an incredibly soft-spoken person. Mm-hmm. He has a very soft, soothing, kind of fatherly voice. Like he just seems like somebody that you would go to if you needed advice, you know, like sagely wisdom. He seems like the kind of person that you would have gone to. And, you know, especially his first films, and arguably moving forward, his films are so violent and so brutal, and then you see the mind that they came from, and it's just it's wild, you know, like you would never expect such an articulate, soft-spoken, seemingly gentle person to come up with these ideas. And you know, everybody that I've heard talk about him, Heather Langenkamp in particular comes to mind, but really anybody who has worked with him, just talk about what a wonderful and amazing, kind man he was. And, you know, all those Nightmare on Elm Street kids, I think that they looked to him very much as kind of a fatherly figure. And so I'm glad that we continue to honor him in this way, because I just have so much respect for him, not only as a filmmaker, certainly as a filmmaker, but he just seemed like such a decent, smart, cool guy. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really is. And like you said, it doesn't really matter. We've talked about this before, right? We've even talked about this in previous episodes, you know, that just people misunderstand horror, and people misunderstand maybe the creative process and the process of making creative stuff. You can write dark things. You can paint and draw dark stuff. You can even just love dark things, or Halloween, or music, right. You know, that heavy metal, that, you know, it just has all this horrific imagery. It usually actually doesn't mean that you yourself have these predispositions to being dark and acting in a evil, bad way. It seems to be just an escape for us, just a way to experience the darkness of life that we all know exists and we have to encounter and confront from time to time in a very safe way. And people have even argued that it may actually benefit people who are. I read this thing that I don't know if it's true, and of course you never know, but that studies, blah blah blah, have been done recently and talked about how people who are horror fans have fared the pandemic a little better than others. You know, I don't know. This is some study somebody did somewhere, some university, but the theory was that these folks kind of practiced for it. you know? Like, people like us have had to kind of confront these uncomfortable images and these uncomfortable feelings and live vicariously through these characters that are put in these absolutely horrifying situations on screen, when you can't help but ask yourself, what would you do in that situation, And so we've kind of worked through these emotions in advance so that perhaps, when something truly horrible confronts us, these folks are maybe a little more experienced and able to kind of compartmentalize, or at least, deal with those emotions a little bit better. It's just a theory,
Yeah.
But it does make you think, because there's some pattern there, right? Here is Wes Craven, who came from this extremely religious family, and he was very sheltered as a child. And it turns out, later on, this is the kind of stuff that he ends up really good at. It's not the only stuff he ever wanted to do.
No.
God, he tried really to break out, and people kept turning his projects into horror movies, and eventually just like, all right, well, if this is my lot, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to embrace it and do it. And he's really, really good at it.
Right.
So, it's just, it's complicated, right? Nothing is.
Yeah. The only instance that I can remember him branching out, he did a movie called Music of the Heart that I think starred Meryl Streep and was a very sentimental, kind of sappy movie. I know that I saw it. I don't remember anything about it at all. I imagine that it was quality, but yeah, he kind of fell into this niche, and he was good at it. He just happened to be good at it. And talking about, horror filmmakers or writers or whomever and horror fans, yeah, first of all, on a personal level, I know this to be true. You and I are huge fans of the genre. We are both big softies,
Yeah.
we
pretty emotional.
We're sensitive guys. Yeah.
We cried in front of each other embarrassingly on several occasions watching some touching moment in a movie.
Right. And so, on a personal level, I know that, but then also, Linnea Quigley told us, and I've heard this from not directly, but in interviews and things, I've heard from other stars who do conventions and things, that horror fans are the most gracious and kind people that they have ever encountered, which is why so many people in the industry are willing and eager to do fan conventions and things, because the fans are so grateful and generous and complimentary and kind. And I believe it. I believe it 100%. That it's people like us. And I don't know. I don't know if I can speak for you on this, but I can speak for myself. I think that I am a kind of person who found it difficult to find a community and a crowd. I eventually ended up finding theater people, and I found, a deep affinity for people who shared my love of horror. And so I embraced those communities and am grateful for them. And I think that there are a lot of people like me out there who wanted something to identify with, and they came upon this and were embraced by a community, and that feels good. and here we are. My goodness, how old is your kid? We've been doing this since before your kid was even a twinkle in your eye.
Yeah, he's 5 now. Yeah, you're right. We had no idea.
Yeah, so it's been like 6 years or something that we've been doing this, and we've said 100 times that the reason that we're still doing it is because we receive such positive and encouraging feedback from people all over the world. It's gratifying. It feels good. And we're happy to, I love talking to you every week. You and I have become, I consider you one of my closest friends, but I don't think that we would continue doing it and recording it for posterity.
No.
If it weren't for that kind of community that we feel a part of. So yeah, the people out there, and I'm not going to be reaching any of them via this podcast, but the people out there who don't get it, they just don't get it. But those of you who are listening, and those of you who are fans the same way that we are, you get it.
We're really patting ourselves on the back here, aren't we? Welcome to the club.
I'm not meaning to. I'm really just trying to express gratitude. Yeah. I'm so thankful for it. It brings a lot of joy to my life.
This is a really, really fun, safe, you wouldn't, again, people looking at it from the outside wouldn't see it.
Right.
Wouldn't necessarily understand it or believe it. But for those of us in the know, including all of you guys listening out there, you get it. This is our safe space, I guess.
It is. And I want to make it a safe space for our listeners. And recently I offended somebody, and I honestly try really hard not to offend anybody, because that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is just about having fun and talking about movies, and I don't want to turn anybody off. I don't want to offend anybody. First of all, we want listeners, but secondly, we do want to make this a place where people can retreat and not
be on their guard or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. So my point is, obviously you and I are people, real people with feelings and thoughts and opinions, and I'm bound to say things from time to time that some people are not going to agree with. There's just no way of getting around that. But I never mean to I respect our listeners, and I respect their ideas and their thoughts and their values. I never mean to come from a place of challenging people or demeaning people. I never mean to come from that place. So moving forward, I hope everybody will keep that in mind. I'm just trying to have a good time, and we don't script this stuff, We're just talking off the top of our heads, and I say stupid shit all the time, and often I beg Todd to edit it out. And usually for, what we publish, out there publicly, you do edit out my stupid shit, and I really appreciate that. But I also really like the fact that on our Patreon page, we are posting these things unedited, because those fans who appreciate us enough to want to subscribe to our Patreon, I want them to get the whole raw deal. I want them to know the things that we say behind the scenes. I want them to know the things that we say and cut out, because I feel like that gives them some more insight just into who we are, and it's maybe a little bit more of a genuine look at us. And I like, you and I, every time we do this, we're like, I'm Todd and I'm Craig with two guys and a chainsaw, and that's where the episode ends. And then you and I keep talking for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
We keep talking about the movie, or we talk about things that are going on in our lives. And I like that the people who choose to have the opportunity to hear that stuff.
Yeah. Me too.
But maybe we better get back to the movie.
I don't know. Sure, let's do it. Well, I mean, I would say it follows a formula, but it also kind of helped establish the formula too. Some of these things anyway. The gas station attendant warns the family not to go. It had been done at least once before, but, Craven liked it and he did it and it became a trope. Then, we got these themes that continue on into Deliverance and things like that. It does at some point become kind of a rape revenge story. And again, themes like, that straw dogs explored as far as what are you going to do when the most brutal things happen to you? You yourself have to stoop to the level of what you're up against in order to do it. And honestly, the whole man from nowhere thing of the Western genre is very much of that, which also takes place in the American West. Nobody from the town can deal with the bad guys because the bad guys are so bad and nobody in town is. You got to have this guy from absolutely nowhere, just this mythical figure, a deus ex machina kind of person, to just show up with a mysterious past and nobody knows where he's from. He's got to deal with the situation because only he can get as brutal as he needs to get things done. And then he has to leave because he's not welcome in the community anymore because he's violated all the social norms. He's the hero, but he can't stay. That's just sort of the mythology there. So these people are getting into this situation that they are completely unprepared for. Like I would be driving across the West. They suddenly get spooked out by some planes flying really low overhead, and Bob kind of goes a little crazy with the car. Tries to dodge a rabbit in the middle of the road, like really stupidly. Rolls off of the road. Oh, by the way, they're a bit lost as well. Their axle completely breaks right in the territory, like you said, of where we have seen these bad guys have been surveilling them. We haven't seen the bad guys, but we've heard them. We've seen through their POV, and we know that they're in trouble. And what happens? But Bob goes off in one direction, and Doug, one of the older... Yeah, the son-in-law goes in the other direction, and they're going to leave the three girls, Claire, played by Dee Wallace, the younger daughter, her name was Brenda, and Bobby. He's the man who's left behind to guard the gals. But they're not really worried about anything, right? Because they can't see
terribly.
anything.
I mean, the mom's like worried about rattlesnakes, but they're certainly not worried about feral cannibals living in the hills.
For sure. Well, and you can see for miles, right? Except for the hills nearby. If you feel like if there's something coming at you, you're going to see it from a mile away anyway.
Yeah,
like some animal or something like that.
Well, Bob, and they're relatively prepared. I mean, they're in a camper, so they have food and water.
They're not panicking.
And they have weapons. They have two guns. They have two pistols. Big Bob takes one, and he leaves one with Bobby. The mom says that she thinks that Doug ought to have a gun too, but Doug says, I am not comfortable leaving you all here, the women without a gun. So he goes off without one, but he's not worried,
Well, and I also like how Big Bob is sort of set up as a tough guy. I mean, we hear that he's a retired cop from 25 years on the force. He stands out there and he's just cursing up a storm. It's actually kind of hilarious.
25 years I'm a cop in the worst goddamn precinct in Cleveland. You shoot arrows at me and the hillbillies throw dogs off the roofs at me, and I'm even shot at on 2 separate occasions by my own men. But none of these bastards ever come as close to killing me as my own goddamn wife and her goddamn road maps and her wrong turns and her goddamn hysterical screaming and her...
Watch your language. And you watch your heart, too. You know what Dr. Springer said.
Well, Dr. Springer can take his stethoscope and shove it into his little black bag sideways.
I mean, I understand that it's the 70s, but he's also racist.
Yes, he is. I'm going to have to bleep some things out.
Yeah.
Again, also sort of like Deliverance, where these guys really set themselves up as tough wilderness folks. They're going to kind of go out there on their adventure. They realize that they're just not equipped for this. Maybe in the city, but with his badge and his backup and all the stuff at his disposal and his knowledge, Bob is good and fine. But he gets neutered very quickly out here in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying, right? Because he's like your best hope.
Well, and Bobby, the young son, I feel like he's put in a position like, oh, you stay back with the women folk. And he is young, and I feel like initially he has kind of some like bravado, like, you know, he's kind of a tough guy, like he can do flips and stuff.
He's good at gymnastics. He's athletic.
But I also like that one of the first things that happens is that the dogs are agitated, especially Beauty, the female dog. She's very agitated and she's barking. And they talk about, the women and Bobby talk about, you know, what is her problem? And they say, well, maybe there are snakes around, or and she can hear them or something. And I think it's Lynn D. Wallace's character who says, well, but Beauty's not freaking out. And one of them says, Beast isn't freaking out. And one of them says, well, that's Beast's MO. He's always quiet until he makes the kill strike. He doesn't want anybody to see it coming, which is important later because Beast becomes a really important character later in this movie.
Yeah.
But Beauty is freaking out, and she ends up getting loose and running into the hills, and Bobby goes running after her. And he can hear her barking, and he hears other noises, and eventually he hears that terrifying sound of a dog being fatally hurt, you know, that terrible squealing, yelping sound. And he actually finds her, and she has been killed and gutted. And it's pretty gross. And apparently Craven and the producer bought an actual dead dog from like the sheriff's department. Yeah. And used it as the prop. It's pretty gross. You know, I love dogs and I hate seeing them in peril, but like if it's really in service to the movie, I can totally deal with it. And this is because not only does Bobby find the dead dog and know something weird is going on, but he also, I don't know if he fully sees one of the hill people, but he definitely knows that there's somebody around. Yeah. And he ends up trying to run back home, but he falls and is unconscious apparently for a while and doesn't end up coming back until quite a bit later when it's dark. And he doesn't tell anybody else what he's seen. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it was just because he didn't want to scare them, but ultimately I don't think that was a wise choice. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think maybe if they had known that there was a menacing presence, that they would have been a little bit more on guard and a little bit more prepared, and they wouldn't have felt comfortable splitting up when things started to get hairy, which they do pretty soon. But that all starts with when Big Bob finally does get back to the service station.
Big Bob is walking in the direction of the service station, and he sees that, you know, it's kind of there's lots of little things in the image. You know, it's quite good filmmaking, actually. The little things in the image that suggest things that are ominous. One of the things is that pig is no longer in its cage. You know, the door is a little open. Big Bob walks in. There seems to be blood on the wall, on the floor. He pulls out his gun. He's very cop, going in there. And then he gets shot at. We know that it's Fred, or we imagine it's Fred. And he goes to the door where Fred had shot him from and bangs on it and finally kicks it in. And Fred is hanging from the ceiling, from a belt. And he pulls him down.
Get your stupid neck out of that belt, you jackass! Should have left you hanging after you took a shot at me. Not until you tell me what the hell is going on.
You're trespassing. That's what. Give me that.
You always try to stop trespassers by hanging yourself?
Something like that.
Well, Fred says, I thought you were somebody else. And this is when he gives that whole backstory explanation that we've already explained.
Yeah, gone through, yeah.
I think that he was killing himself because that would have been preferable to actually being confronted and assaulted by his son, Jupiter, who we haven't seen yet.
Yep.
But we see now.
Yeah, Jupiter leaps out at Fred. How does he take them? I can't remember. He takes out Fred first, and then he jumps.
He jumps through the glass window and pulls Fred out. And we don't see what happens, but then Bob goes out and finds Fred like impaled into the door of the outhouse.
Yes. And then Big Bob jumps out and starts smashing him in the head with a crowbar. It's a brutal attack. And apparently they had to make some cuts to some of these things, including this scene, in order to not get an X rating from the MPAA.
Yeah.
Because Craven was very, he, especially early on, he was very, this is also Vietnam War era time. We're kind of coming out of that. Had very clear ideas about violence and how he felt that movies, particularly Westerns, really glorified violence. And he was like, people need to see real, violence on the screen. Like they need to see it up close and personal in all of its actual brutality so that it's not glorified. So if you're going to have violence on the screen, it needs to be realistic and it needs to be extremely uncomfortable. When he did the Last House on the Left, that was kind of his credo for that. And he carries that through into this film as well. He had to make some cuts, but I'll say I think even today, the film feels pretty brutal. There are more brutal things now. We have seen much more realistic and bad stuff, but I think the emotional reactions of the characters, especially in some of the scenes coming up later, just really support the stark, brutal reality of what's happening to them. I can't think of many worse ways to go than to be, bludgeoned over the head with a crowbar or something like that.
I don't remember that.
Maybe it was Fred who was bludgeoned with a crowbar at first.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
because Bob tries to run back to his family, but he's being tormented off screen by Jupiter is the
Gleefully.
Dad's name. Yeah. And eventually Bob, I don't know if he has a heart attack or if he just is having heart pain, but he's all sweaty and he falls to the ground. And
seems to be a heart attack because it's set up earlier that she says, remember your heart condition.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's disabled. Jupiter gets his gun, and then Jupiter gets on the radio and says something like, "It's a go." And that's when things start getting scary. And like you said, like the movie is brutal and it is violent and there is some violent content, but compared to today's standards in terms of how graphic it is, it's really not that graphic. It's just really scary. Like it's so perilous.
It feels real. It has just a grittiness to it, I think, and a reality to it. I just before we sat down to record this, I got off of watching the Evil Dead remake. I finally got around to seeing that. And my God, is that a violent movie?
Uh-huh.
But you almost laugh at it. It's so over the top.
Right.
It's scary and it's super bloody and the effects are great and very realistic looking, I suppose, but I mean, it's over the top silly. Like you're not going to imagine anything like this is ever going to remotely happen to you or your friends.
Right. But something like this, it doesn't have to be all hack and slash to be scary, just to feel powerless.
Yeah.
And especially, I think it's smart to put a family in peril because when like this happens every day, if you're in a situation where there's a lot of danger and people are potentially in danger, if you're in a situation like that with strangers, sure, you have empathy, you care, you don't want to see people get hurt, but at least it's not you. But if it's your family, it may as well be you. It's an extension of you.
Yeah.
And what happens is they lure Bobby away from the camper by imitating
the dog.
Beast, the dog, who is also run off at this point. And once he's gone, he comes back and he goes to open the camper and it's locked, and he thinks that he's just locked himself out. But we immediately see that the truth is, in his absence, Pluto, another one of the family, has gotten in there. And just his presence in there, you know, the mom, Ethel, and the sister, Brenda, and the baby, are in there asleep, completely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And even though he's not doing anything menacing to them in that moment, just knowing that he's locked in there with them and that they are completely vulnerable is so scary. And I do want to pause here because this is really kind of the first time, I think, that we've seen him. But Pluto is played by it's Berryman, right?
Yeah, Michael Berryman.
Michael Berryman, who, if you are a horror fan or a fan of weird science from the 80s, you will totally recognize. Michael Berryman.
Or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Was he in that? I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy, he was born premature with something, I think he has said something like 26 birth defects. And his cranium wasn't fully formed and he had to go through all kinds of surgeries. And so he has a somewhat disfigured look and he's very menacing in appearance. Now, anytime you see him in interviews, he is highly intelligent, incredibly well-spoken, and
really
just
nice.
seems really nice.
Yeah.
Just seems like a really cool dude who was just given this lot in life with his appearance and capitalized on it. Good for him.
Yeah.
And he's great as a menacing presence in these movies. I'm actually a really big fan of him. I don't think that I would be such a big fan if I hadn't seen him in interviews. But seeing him in interviews, he's just so articulate and he speaks so smartly about the industry and his place in it. And I have a lot of admiration for the guy, but he looks like a crazy backwoods. You know, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to make him up. They don't have to put prosthetics on him because that's what he looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it really works. But he's in there, and then it's just a siege, and eventually they set off a bomb, I guess, of sorts.
Doug had come back from his outing, and he said he didn't really find anything, but there was a big junkyard, and he had a bunch of random stuff, like a spool of wire, and I don't even know what he was planning on doing with all this stuff. Honestly, he just thought it was cool or it might be useful.
Yeah.
And he and his wife, they are actually banging in the station wagon when this guy sneaks in and Bobby is lured away. So when Bobby comes back, he knocks on the station wagon door and interrupts them and says, "Hey, I locked myself out again." And like you said, at this point, nobody, they don't realize that the Pluto is inside, taking things out of the fridge, taking out meat, scavenging, basically.
Pilfering, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then around the corner, I think, comes, what's his name?
Mars.
Mars, yeah. They all have these names of planets.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny that the German censorship committee or whatever, I suppose our equivalent of the MPAA, they forced a lot of cuts and they changed the family from being cannibalistic humans to being aliens.
It's so weird, right? Aliens who hate humans. And somehow that makes everything more easy to stomach, I guess.
Which worked because they were all named after different planets. I thought that was really kind of funny. But they're just very menacing. They're dirty and and they look kind of feral. Apart from Pluto, though, they're just dirty people. They
are.
In the remake and the sequel of the remake, they are horribly disfigured.
Yeah,
people.
It's like inbred, and they look like monsters. I think it's better to not have them look like monsters. Honestly,
I think so too.
It's better to humanize them as much as possible. And again, it just goes with that idea that these are real things that could happen to real people. people and we can't glorify it. Life is not so black and white. There's a scene here before, again, the explosion hasn't gone off yet, but he is getting the key from those two, and he admits that Bobby admits that Beauty is dead. He just cries. His acting here is fantastic. Just like you had said before, Bobby didn't really want to talk about it. He seemed disturbed sort of the whole time, and you could just tell something was off. And, then the other dog runs off, so he's distressed about that. And he just kind of has a little breakdown here.
Mm-hmm. Beauty's dead.
What?
Beauty's been dead since this afternoon.
Beauty's dead. Well, what happened? Why didn't you tell us sooner?
When I found her, she'd been gutted. Somebody slit her right. It was pretty bad. I was so scared, I ran away.
Apparently, one of the requirements for this role was to be able to cry on cue, and he was able to do that in the audition. Yeah. Oh God, I love that. And again, this is just one of those very, very touching human moments about this movie, where these characters are so real, and their emotions are so genuine that it does make what happens to them just feel more visceral and real and brutal.
The peak of the brutality happens in a matter of minutes. This is an hour and a half long movie, and maybe this whole scene is maybe 5-7 minutes long, maybe. I think it's a distraction. They kind of set off this explosion, and they see and hear that Big Bob is like nailed to a tree out in the desert, and he is engulfed in flames. And what makes it all the more horrific is that he's not dead, and he's pleading for help, and he's clearly in agony, and he's on fire. Doug goes into the camper and gets a fire extinguisher, still has no idea that Pluto is on top of Brenda, holding her mouth closed so that she can't scream. He's completely oblivious, and he just shouts to her to take care of the baby. And so then they all run out. Everybody else who's still there runs out to where Bob is on fire, and they put him out and pull him down. And Ethel, the mom, is completely in shock and in denial, and she's just saying, that's not my Bob. That's not my Bob.
It's such a convincing emotional breakdown, and your heart just breaks for this woman. Her acting is so good, and this moment is so touching and real, which we don't often get in horror movies. One of the biggest things that makes me crazy sometimes about these movies is like somebody's friend will die right in front of them, and then they just kind of bounce back and get back to escaping or doing whatever. Like they've almost forgotten about it an hour later, or something like that. But definitely not in this movie.
No, she is completely broken and completely detached from reality from this point on. She just cannot accept what's happening.
No help to anybody at this point, including herself. And apparently when they were shooting this in the original script, he was supposed to be nailed to a tree. And there are really no trees out in the desert. And they kind of realized that when they were out there filming. And they just kind of looked one way and looked the other way and ended up setting all this up at this Joshua tree, which is an endangered plant. They should have gotten in real trouble for setting this tree on fire, actually. But
it was the 70s.
They got away with it. It was a different time. Well, it wasn't nearly as bad as what was happening back in the trailer. Mars comes in around the corner. They're both inside there. And this is it's shot in a very messy, appropriately messy way, very documentary style.
Yeah.
We can hear that Pluto is back there attempting, if not actually trying to rape this woman. Mars comes in and he tears him off of her and says, "What are you doing? You're not a real man. Let me show you what a real man is." And he goes back there. In the meantime, he sees the baby. He hands the baby to Pluto. He says, "Here, take the baby." They run out with the baby. The mom is in there. They drop the baby on the floor. It's just a mess inside.
Bobby and the mom and Dee Wallace come back, only to see Pluto running away. I don't think he has a baby yet, but they go in and Mars almost immediately shoots the mom in the chest, and she falls down like onto a couch or something. And then Lynn realizes that her baby is right there. And of course, she is 100% motivated by protecting her baby. But Mars shoots her. And she still continues to try to fight. And she actually gets one good stab in. She stabs him in the leg. But then he shoots her again, close range, in the chest. And she's dead. You know, this is brutal. This is a young mother trying to defend her infant, and she's just brutally murdered right there. And as you said, like it's very much suggested in this movie that either Pluto or Mars or both had raped Brenda in the back of the camper. In the remake, which I will contend is a good movie from a cinematic perspective, and it's very true to the original. There are very few changes in terms of plot and pacing and that type of thing. But it's even more gratuitously violent and brutal. And I don't remember if I surely have in 300 episodes. This is the one movie that I made my partner Alan watch, and he was mad at me for weeks. Like, he was so disturbed and upset by it that he was legitimately angry at me for making him watch it.
Why did you make him watch it? I do kind of
Because I thought it was a good movie. Like, I thought that, you know, as violent and as graphic as it was, I thought that it was really, really well made. I don't know why I thought that he would appreciate that because he doesn't even really like horror movies.
These things we learn over time.
Right. And much like me, he is particularly disturbed by sexual violence, and the sexual violence is a lot more explicit. It's not just a suggestion. It's very clear what is happening. It's not terribly graphic. Like, it's not like there's a lot of nudity, but it is very clear what is happening, and it is very disturbing and very upsetting, and it was a mistake to have him watch it. One that I paid for.
I mean, it really, like, it was a hard watch, and I'm not, you know, I'm not really interested in seeing that movie again for that reason. You know, that scene was just upsetting. Once again, you can say that, again, it services the plot and the whole point and the whole theme of the movie. I am certainly not against violence as long as it's not gratuitous. I do feel like that sort of veered into gratuitous exploitation, like, hey, it's the modern age and we can do more and we should do more because what's the point of remaking this movie if we can't? And arguments can be made for that. But
that's true, but at the same time, if you watch that movie and if you compare those scenes, they're not that different, really. I don't know why. I think that maybe it's just because, I don't know, this feels very 70s, and the remake is very sharp and clean.
Yeah, it's very it's like it could have happened yesterday. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's maybe a detachment from the era, the time period, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this movie is disturbing and upsetting too. And you know, all that happens really, really fast. And then Mars, as Doug and Bobby are, you know, coming back, Mars pulls Brenda out of the camper, and almost as though he's doing it intentionally to hurt them, right in plain view, he like pulls Brenda's hair back and sticks the muzzle of the gun in her mouth, like he's going to blow her head off right in front of them. It just so happens that the chamber is empty. And so he's instead, he says, I'll be back for you. Which then, you know, she, more than anybody, is terrified for the rest of the movie because she is certain that they will be back for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's right to think that because that is their plan.
They leave and Bobby is like yelling out at them, and The camera from the point of view of the hills just pulls back. You know, it's a zoom back. We talked about zoom before. And once again, they are completely surrounded by nothingness. That's how quickly these people came in, took their baby, killed a couple of them, terrorized them, and then left. And what are these people going to do now?
Nothing.
You know, it's truly like that shot just shows what a hopeless, helpless situation they're in. It's brilliant.
Well, and they have no choice but to take matters into their own hands. Now we see the whole family, the clan family, you know, gather, and they're really excited to have a baby that they're going to eat.
Yeah, they talk about eating it.
They call to their lookout. It's one of their brothers, Mercury, who is played by the producer, I think.
Peter Locke.
In a cameo role. And you only see him a couple of times very, very briefly, but they call to him and say, you know, come join us, you know, we've got a baby or whatever. And he gets up to come, but Beast sneaks up behind him and pushes him off the cliff.
Oh, that's such a great...
I love that Beast becomes an active character in this movie.
Yeah.
He does things to actively protect this family, which I believe dogs are loyal and they're intuitive and they can sense danger. I don't know if I believe that this dog could be as stealthy and meticulous as he is, but True. I love it in the movie. So he kills Mercury, and Jupiter, Papa Jupiter, asks Mars, he says, you killed them all, like I said, right? And of course, Mars has to admit that he didn't, but he says, all right, we're not going to eat the baby yet. Keep it alive, because I know that the dad will come for it.
Yeah.
And then the night passes and it's morning, and he, of course, is right. You know, Doug immediately is running out with Beast to try to find them. And Beast leads Doug right to them. And also, Bobby and Brenda are left at home. And Bobby and Brenda have been painted as the kids of the family, even though technically speaking, they are adults. You know, I would guess that they're supposed to be 17, 18, somewhere around there. But they are kind of left alone. And they find that somebody has left behind one of the radios that they communicate with, so they can hear what they're talking about and their plans. So they're a little bit prepared. Doug tells Beast to go get the bad guys because Pluto and Jupiter are headed towards the camper. And so Beast goes after them. He ends up taking out Jupiter, stalking him quietly, sneaking up behind him, and first tearing out his Achilles tendon, and then later, while he's disabled, coming back and ripping his throat out. And Bobby and Brenda set up a trap using the materials that Doug brought back from the abandoned military site or whatever. And it's kind of this genius trap where they wrap that steel rope around the wheel of the car, the broken wheel of the car, and they set like a loop trap, and they use their dead mother's body as bait, which is like Brenda's like, we can't do this. Like it feels like, you know, a desecration of their mother's body to use her as bait. But they do, and it works. Jupiter arrives. He stands right in front of the mom. He's confused. They start up the car and hit the gas, and that wheel starts spinning and pulls the rope, and he's trapped in the loop that they've set, and he gets dragged in. And they're celebrating their win, but then the trap breaks and Jupiter gets free. But they have another trap set. I don't know if Craven or whoever designed this came up with it, but we've seen it done in other movies that we've talked about.
Yeah.
They fill the cabin of the camper with gas. They've got like gas tanks or something. and they run into the camper, but then they jump out the back window, and they've got it set up so that if the door opens, it will strike a match and blow the camper up, which it does. But somehow, I think that Jupiter smelled the gas and was suspicious.
Yeah.
And somehow it didn't get him. So when Bobby runs back to make sure that he's dead, Jupiter attacks him, but then Brenda attacks Jupiter, like jumps on his back like a spider monkey and is like hitting him and stuff, which I love this movie because you take ordinary people who you couldn't imagine could be capable of something like this, but when their life is threatened or the lives of the ones that they loved are threatened, survival instinct just takes over. And I believe this. I believe that a little tiny blonde girl, in an effort to save her brother and herself, would jump on this 250-pound guy and do everything that she could to fight.
Yeah.
And somehow they end up, I don't remember how they end up killing him. I think it's Bobby that kills him.
And then they're just rejoicing. They're hugging. It's like they won the football game. He's got her up in the air, and they're just super happy.
After Jupiter is taken out, the only business remaining is rescuing the baby. And that's all on Doug. Well, kind of. It's on Doug and Ruby.
Yeah, because Ruby's our little rebel there.
Yeah.
You remember she wanted to escape earlier. And so you can tell she's a little getting uncomfortable with the baby thing. So she actually steals the baby away from the family and runs off and basically delivers him to Doug as Doug is up there looking for them. But
what's his name? Mars is right behind in chase.
Mm-hmm. He is. And so there's there's some really interesting action here, I think. Really effective. He kind of hides. He ducks into a crevice, and Doug pops out, but Mars is right there. He's chasing him.
Mars is the last one, except for Ruby and for the mother of the clan, who never leaves the cave.
Yeah.
she's a heavy woman who never leaves the cave, and ultimately, when the movie's over, she's kind of the only one that we don't really know what happened to.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe setting up for a sequel or something. Who knows? She's still there. But Doug, he's got his gun, right? But that kind of goes off. But Mars ends up on top of him. And there's this huge kind of fight with a knife. And it looks like Mars is going to stab Doug. There's a really close call next to his head. Finally, Doug turns the tables on him, gets on top of him, and stabs him relentlessly.
Well, that's first. They're in like a rattlesnake den.
Oh,
and
that's right.
And Ruby grabs a rattlesnake by the neck and
that's so silly.
It's kind of silly. I don't know. It is silly. It didn't bother me. I read, this was a live rattlesnake that actually at one point got loose, and everybody freaked out until the snake handler found it. But the actress who played Ruby, her name's Janice Blythe, who, by the way, was called in to audition for Dee Wallace's part, but she really, really wanted to be Ruby. She wanted to be the wild girl. She felt like that was more challenging, that there was more meat to it. And there's a cute story about how basically the role came down to a foot race between all of the actresses
Literally.
who were slated, and there was a literal foot race where Wes Craven was present, and he said that they said go, and Janice Blythe didn't run with the rest of the girls, and she just kind of looked at Wes Craven, and he looked at her and was like, "What are you doing?" And she kind of smiled and then turned and took off, overcame all the rest of the girls to win the race, and so she got the role. Now, I'm sure that that's a very cute story, and it's not the only reason that she got the role, but it's a good story nonetheless.
Yeah,
but
it is.
This was a real snake, and they wanted her to pick it up, and she said she wouldn't do it unless the producer did it too. And so I guess the producer very gingerly kind of touched the snake, really like, but that was enough for her, and she did it, and she picked it up.
Yeah.
And she uses it to disable Mars. And then, you're right, Doug gets on top of him and just stabs him, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Just brutally.
Which version of the movie did you see? Did we watch the same version? When I first saw this, when I was in high school, and I'd rented it from the video store, this is where the movie ended.
Yeah, the image of his face goes to red, and then
it's like a freeze frame.
Yeah. And then the credits begin, and that's
and
the
this
end.
is the ending that Wes Craven really liked, and I guess it was maybe the original ending.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure when the alternate ending got tacked on, but again, it really hits home. I mean, first of all, it hits home the fact that this guy is just as savage now as these people were.
Right?
It was exactly wrapped around and bookended the point he was trying to make. It also kind of leads you to wonder, frustratingly, like, well, what happens to everybody now?
Right. Right. And I like that. I like that.
I do too.
You don't know. I mean, they're still in the middle of the desert.
They still have no way back.
Half of them are dead.
Could there be others? What's happened to the mom? Half of them are dead. You're right. It's like he got his revenge, but it doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't change the fact that many of them are dead. They saved the baby. But then I was surprised because I expected the movie to end there. And then we got one more scene in the version that I have, which is actually a little sappy.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a sunset behind them. They're kind of half in silhouette and they're walking along, and Ruby is there behind them, and they kind of turn around, and there's just almost like an acceptance of Ruby at this point. Brenda reaches out and holds her hand, almost like building a bridge between the two cultures. And then the camera zooms in on the hand holding with the sunset in the background, and it kind of fades out. I was like, that's weird.
Yeah, I think that the remake does something similar, but then I think the remake goes even a step further. If I remember, I may be making this up because it's been a really long time since I've seen it, but I think that the remake ends with one of those binocular POV shots suggesting that there are more of them that they don't know about, and that they are still potentially in peril. But I like the original ending of this. It feels very 70s grindhouse. Things aren't just, wrapped up with a nice, neat little bow. It's kind of left. Well, it's jarring. You don't get things tied up for you, and I like that. There is a sequel to this movie, and I grew up watching it. In fact, I believe I saw the sequel before I saw the original. And the sequel is not very good. It features a lot of flashbacks to the original movie. It's about a biker gang, kind of. Not a gang, but like a group of kids who are like doing like a dirt bike something in the desert, and they end up getting besieged by these people. And as it turns out, one of the kids in this group is Ruby, which you don't find out until near the end. And I grew up with it, so I have an appreciation of it. I don't think that it's great. And then, of course, there are the remakes. The first one I saw in the theater, and it was a very difficult watch. It's oh my goodness, it's so violent. It's one of the most uncomfortable movies I've sat through, but at the same time, like I said, I thought it was really well done, and Wes Craven was involved. He didn't direct it. I think he was a producer on it, and he liked it. He was very satisfied with it, and I thought that for what it was good. Like you said, I don't really feel the need to watch it again. And then there was a sequel to the remake, which was just really, really gratuitous, and
really,
I didn't think it was good at all. In fact, I rewatched it recently against my better judgment and was reminded, no, this is crap.
Yeah.
But this movie I do recommend. It's Wes Craven's second movie. Very much in keeping with his first movie. It's brutal. It's unapologetic. We'll never know how brutal it might have been because they were forced to cut quite a lot and that footage is believed to be entirely lost. Like, it just doesn't exist anymore. So we'll never know how it might have turned out. But it's just the character performances are believable. It's oddly relatable. Like, you can almost put yourself in these people's shoes. The villains are brutal and nasty, but if you take a moment to think about it, you realize that they are a product of their circumstances too. And I do think that that's an excellent juxtaposition to show that by nature or by circumstance, you've got this kind of feral, violent family, but then by circumstance, the nature of the civilized family comes out. And when it comes right down to it, and again, I'm not trying to offend anybody here, this is my opinion, but we are animals when it comes right down to it. And we do have a survival instinct, and we do have an instinct to protect those who are near and dear to us. And put in these types of situations, we might find ourselves capable of things that we would never otherwise think ourselves capable of. And I just think that really resonates if you choose to think about it. If you don't, it's still a really good 70s grindhouse type movie.
With a quality of acting that you don't normally find in this.
That's
kind
true.
Of movie.
Yeah, and so you could, in the same amount of time, you could either watch it or listen to us talk about it.
This is turning out to be a banner episode for us.
It's a super-sized episode, but that's okay because it's our 300th and we're allowed to be a little self-indulgent.
Called for a bit of celebration here, yeah. Well, I mean, I cannot believe that we've been through 300 nights of sitting down, or mornings for you now.
Yeah.
Sitting down and chatting about 300 horror movies. It has been, and will hopefully continue to be, just a highlight of my week every single week.
Me too.
I love chatting about these things with you. I love the excuse to watch these movies and to talk about them in depth. And also, like you had said earlier, just really, really grateful for the support and the people who, quite frankly, if we had not been getting feedback and not have developed relationships and had conversations, with our listeners over all these years, we probably still wouldn't be doing it today.
Yeah.
So we're very grateful for those folks, and also, those folks who have enjoyed us so much and really support what we do so much that they've reached out and actually thrown a few bucks our way to help us do some more things with this podcast. So I just got to give a big shout out to our supporters on Patreon. No matter where you come from, no matter how you're supporting us, we're just grateful that you're listening to this now and have made it to the end of this very long episode.
Yeah. I know a couple of people who will appreciate it. We've talked about this before, like, oh man, we're running long. And then we have a few friends who are like, no, we love it.
Keep it going.
So to those two of you, you're welcome.
Easy for them to say. They never see what I cut out. Well, thanks again for listening. Again, thank you for your support on our 300th episode here. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us online. You can access the other 299 by going to our website, twoguys.red40net.com. Just search Two Guys in the Chainsaw Podcast. You'll find our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, and, of course, our website. Leave us a comment any one of those places to chat back with us. And until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.